for this independence of the Congo, although being proclaimed today by agreement with Belgium, an amicable country with which we are on equal terms, no Congolese worthy of the name will ever be able to forget that it was by fighting that it has been won. A day-to-day fight, an ardent and idealistic fight, a fight in which we were spared neither privation nor suffering, and for which we gave our strength and blood. We're proud of this struggle, of tears, of fire, and of blood, to the depths of our being, for it was a noble and just struggle, and indispensable to put an end to the humiliating slavery which was imposed upon us by force. These were the words of Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Congo, on June 30th, 1960, upon independence from Belgium. They were pointed words, words which embarrassed the Belgian king. And 6 months later, Lumumba was dead. The history of coups in Africa is long and detailed, so there's no shortage of historic background with which to provide a backdrop to the events currently taking place in Niger. And as we have stated in other History She Wrote episodes, From Sarajevo to Red Africa produces history essays and programs. We're not going to discuss current events. But again, it's the historic past that defines the events of the present. The past not only creates the impetus for future actions, it defines how everyone else perceives events as they take place. And this brings us back to the Congo in June 1960. When independence for the Congo began to be discussed and prepared for in earnest, Patrice Lumumba was in prison. It wasn't until January of 1960 that Belgium began to truly ready the Congo for the coming independence. And more than a few historians have pointed out that it seemed that Belgium perhaps did not want independence to succeed in the Congo. Certainly, imprisoning the main leadership of the anti-colonial cause was not tremendously good faith behavior, nor did it have the desired outcome of sidelining Lumumba, who was viewed as problematic and radical by the colonizers. At election time, the political party Lumumba headed, the Mouvement National Congolais, won commandingly, and leaders of other political parties demanded Lumumba at the helm of their new independent government. Asserting their independent rights, the Congolese demanded the leader of their choice, no matter the opinion of Belgium. And so, Patrice Lumumba became Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, and delivered his pointed remarks upon independence. 5 days later, the Congo was collapsing. The spark that started the conflagration came in the form of remarks by the leader of the Force Publique. The lack of preparation for independence meant that on June 30th, 1960, there were nowhere near enough trained and educated native Congolese to step into the necessary government positions and successfully run the country. Belgium offered to keep Belgian civil servants in the Congo as a stopgap measure, but truthfully, this also allowed easier access to the lucrative mining interests. Émile Jansin, the commander of the Force Publique, who, by the way, described himself as the little maniac, something that perhaps should have been considered in his appointment to a sensitive post-colonial position, gave an address to his all-white officer corps that there was to be no difference pre- and post-colonial independence. The black military mutinied on 5th July, and the unrest continued to spread. Lumumba acted as quickly as he could, and by 8th July, he appointed Victor Lundula as commander-in-chief of the newly named Armée Nationale Congolaise, the ANC. As Lundula's chief of staff, Colonel Joseph Désiré Mobutu was appointed. Lundula tried to reinstate order. Several times he personally intervened as violence was being waged against whites, but he was unable to gain traction. On 9 July, Belgian paratroopers arrived, ready to escort 10,000 Belgians from the Congo. The ready appearance of foreign troops showing up without so much as a by or leave on Congolese soil did not create any further stability and further undermined the leadership of Lumumba on the world stage. In rapid succession, Katanga and South Kasai seceded from Congo, supported by Belgium. The world watched as Congo descended into chaos. But behind the scenes, Belgium still held the ears of world leaders who were less inclined to take seriously the words of an African considered radicalized. A UN resolution on 14 July authorized UN troops in the Congo to create space for Belgian troops to withdraw, in recognition that the presence of Belgium was making a bad situation worse. Both the United States and the Soviet Union voted to authorize the UN troops. The mandate was strict, however. The UN troops were not to intervene in any domestic matters, but were only there as peacekeepers. Internal struggles, such as the secession of Katanga and South Kasai, were not within the purview of the peacekeeper forces. And so Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union, who readily agreed to help and sent more than 1,000 advisors to the Congo. These advisors worked in concert with the ANC troops to launch an offensive against South Kasai, which left more than 3,000 civilians dead and instituted an enormous refugee crisis. It seemed that there was no direction in which Lumumba or the Congo could turn in order to resolve the ever-evolving crisis. Despite the presence of a large number of Soviet advisors, Lumumba still turned to the U.S. asking for help. But the tales borne by the Belgians of anti-white violence and rape combined with the Soviet presence caused the U.S. to turn a deaf ear to Lumumba's requests. Returning to the Congo, Lumumba was assured by the surrounding African nations of support that never materialized. Increasingly isolated and mistrustful of anyone but his closest advisors, Lumumba declared a state of emergency on 9 August. This state of emergency had 5 main components. 1, it outlawed the formation of groups and clubs without government permission. 2, the government instituted the right to seize and suspend any and all publications, which they immediately began to do. 3, military tribunals were established. 4, Belgian diplomats were expelled, and 5, all Congolese students in Belgium were recalled home. The stage was set for a coup from a surprising source, but the time was not yet entirely ripe. On 5 September, Congolese President Joseph Kasavubu removed Lumumba from office, citing Lumumba's increasing paranoia and inaccessibility. Both houses of parliament disagreed with this action, which was in no way supported by Congolese law, and Lumumba responded by trying to remove Kasavubu. The government was paralyzed. Earlier, as the Congo crisis was in its early stages, in an attempt to stave off complete military collapse, the United States government had given $1 million to the Congolese government. This money came into the hands of the Army Chief of Staff, Colonel Joseph Désiré Mobutu. Mobutu used it to shore up his support within the army, and on 14 September, the Congolese military took over the government in a bloodless coup, citing the paralysis of the leaders as its reasoning. Lumumba himself was placed on house arrest, although he continued to hold meetings and act as though he were still in power. Mobutu claimed the government would be run in the interim by a group of technicians to get things back on track. He immediately expelled Soviet advisors and closed the embassies of Eastern Bloc countries. Mobutu retained power until 1997, but this gets ahead of the story. Patrice Lumumba managed to escape his house arrest in late November, but rather than rush for the border, he stopped to talk to his supporters in villages. He was captured when he came back for his wife and children. Pauline, his wife, watched as Lumumba was beaten and dragged off. The Soviets lodged complaints against Lumumba's detention and introduced a UN resolution. It was soundly defeated. In protest, the socialist nations of the UN withdrew their troops from the international peacekeeping force in the country. 6 weeks after his capture, on 17 January 1961, Patrice Lumumba was tortured, tied to a tree, and shot. A short time later, his body was dug up, hacked apart, and dissolved in acid. It took another month for Mobutu's government to announce Lumumba's death, which they attributed to enraged villagers during an escape attempt. No one believed them. The consequences of the 1960 coup in the Congo stretch to today. After the death of Lumumba, the situation continued to deteriorate. On 18 September 1961, UN Secretary Dag Hammarskjöld was killed in a plane crash on his way to peace negotiations in the Congo. The cause of the crash is still disputed, with some attributing it to pilot error and others to more sinister forces. After Hammarskjöld's death, the UN became far more willing to intervene, and in November of 1961, 20,000 UN troops were sent to the Congo. Within the first month, the Kindu atrocity took place. 13 Italian pilots sent by the UN were beaten and hacked to death by machetes. The Congo crisis continued for 5 years. Another bloodless coup took place, and Joseph Désolé Mobutu solidified his power over the country and renamed himself Mobutu Sese Seko. Congo became Zaire. His corruption, thievery, and his leopard skin hat all became legendary until his removal from power in 1997. But Congo's problems did not end with Mobutu. The nation has been steeped in tragedy, from the 10 to 15 million estimated dead under King Leopold to the several 100,000 dead during the Congo crisis of 1960 to 1965 to the more than 5 million dead since Mobutu's removal in 1997. There is no way we could truly cover the Congo crisis in the 10 to 15 minutes we have for History, she wrote episodes. But the bare bones are present. A colonized nation, unprepared for independence, became a major battleground in the outsourced battles of the Cold War era, with repercussions reverberating today. And Congo is by far not the only nation mired in a seemingly endless cycle of coups and coup attempts. The circumstances then certainly do not match with the circumstances in Niger now, but the pattern does. It remains to be seen what the future of Niger will be following the current coup. As always, there is the chance that this time will be different. There is the chance that French and American troops in the area, a robust radical Islamist threat in the Sahel, and the presence of Russia's Wagner won't devolve into another crisis and flamboyant kleptocratic dictator who builds a Versailles in the jungle. If we pay attention to history, maybe we can avert it this time. Until the next episode of History, she wrote, I'm Ruthie. Please read more, go back further, and for heaven's sake, make sure you can find these places on a map.